Hi guys. Hopefully this works today because last week we had a bunch of issues. So far it seems okay. Hi Crystal. Thank you for joining. If you're new here, this is Back to Basics. We do this each Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we kind of just bring it back to the basics, right? We just kind of focus on things that we typically tend to forget or kind of overlook when we complicate things. So that's what this is today. I'm Sierra, 310 nutritionist and health coach. Hello, Heather. Thank you guys so much for joining. I missed you all last week, but Facebook was just being finicky and I wasn't able to go live. But it was something I really wanted to discuss with you was the calories versus carbs thing. So I'm going to just redo that this week, or not redo it. I'm going to do it because it didn't work last week. And I'm also going to tie in a little bit of cravings as well, because I just posted something about that because I've been seeing people asking about cravings. So we're going to kind of talk about all of it today. So hopefully we can get through it all. Of course, feel free to ask questions. I'll do my best to get to all of them as quickly as I can. Oh, thank you, Heather. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's start with 2 weeks ago where we were talking about calories versus carbs. Now, hear me out, okay? I'm going to kind of explain this, but I just want to remind everyone that if our goal is weight loss, anytime we're talking about weight maintenance, weight loss, weight gain, whatever, we are going to get that as a result of calories, either being in a calorie deficit or being in a calorie maintenance or calorie surplus, right? That is how our weight is affected by calories, right? Now, the thing with carbs is because carbs get a ton of attention, right? And I want to say, of course, however you choose to approach your journey is up to you, right? I always just say find something that is realistic for you to do long term, right? Because if you're going to just do this thing where you're trying to eat this way for a couple weeks and then or a couple months and then you get to your weight and you're like, cool, I did it and now I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing, then we can't expect those results to stick, right? Because if the method is unsustainable, the results are unsustainable. So, with that being said, different things work for different people, right? We know this. That's why at 310, we don't try to say, like, oh, here's your exact eating plan and you have to do this and eat this, because it doesn't work like that for everyone, right? There's just no way to do that. So, when it comes to calories versus carbs, yes, calories is what's going to get you the results you want. I don't care if you're eating perfectly, but if you're eating in a calorie surplus, you will not lose weight, right? Just like, and I'm not saying do this, but I'm just using this as an example. You could eat nothing but carbs all day, bread, whatever, right? Eat nothing but carbs all day long and still lose weight if you are in a calorie deficit, okay? I just want to explain that. However, that is not to say that carbs don't play a role at all, right? Because they do. The reason carbs kind of become, I want to say villainified. What's that word? Vilified? I don't know if that's the right word, but insert that word the proper way. They get a lot of attention. And it's not necessarily the amount of carbs we eat or when we eat them or whatever. It's the type, right? Because there is a big difference between having like some regular old white bread or white grain pasta, and then on the alternative having a whole grain pasta with fiber, or having a bread that's like a multi-grain, multi-seed, and it has this fiber and antioxidants, right? So the issue again isn't necessarily carbs in general. That's what we like to say, and that's what we hear because it's easier to say that, right? It's easier just to blame all carbs because then we don't have to focus on, well, what does this actually mean? Let's think about it. Why would this be a better option? It's easier just to say no to all carbs, right? It's easier to vilify all of them, right? But it's about the type. And the reason that this becomes sort of an issue is because when we're eating refined grains that have been stripped of the fiber and antioxidants and vitamins and minerals and even some protein, right? Because we do know that carbs and protein can be the same thing, right? So we've stripped all that away. So now we have just this food that has significantly less fiber, significantly less nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. So what happens is without that fiber and or protein inside, our body is able to really, really quickly and efficiently break down those sugars from the carb very quickly, which causes a insulin spike, and then it takes up all the sugar and the sugar goes into our cell, and now we have that crash, right? Because now we're needing more energy, because as quickly as we use it, that's quickly as we need to replace it, replenish it, right? So this becomes a problem with weight gain, not because we're eating carbs that are leading us to gain weight. Because if carbs alone caused weight gain, it wouldn't matter what we ate, how we ate, how many calories we ate. Anytime we ate carbs, weight gain would be an outcome, right? Like carbs alone. And we know that that's not true. But the reason carbs have been, I think, getting a lot of attention when it comes to weight loss is because if we're eating the carbs that have been refined, where they don't have a lot of fiber and they don't have a lot of vitamins and minerals and nutrients and protein, we're going to have that very quick sugar response and then the depletion. And then what happens when we deplete our sugar levels, our energy, we need more. And so if we're choosing, I don't want to say inappropriate, but if we're choosing carbs that don't have a lot of that protein and fiber and things accompanying with it, we're going to continue to have that energy spike and then decrease. And then we're going to need to eat more food, right? Because we're going to need that energy. Hi, Barbara. So that's kind of where carbs come into play, right? Like, I'm not saying they don't play a role, but we don't necessarily need to focus so much on carbs if we want to lose weight. However, some people find that easier, right? Because some people are like, hey, if I'm mindful of the carbs that I eat and I make sure I'm eating carbs that have fiber and all these things accompanying it, or if I make sure I eat a carb with a fat or a protein, I know that I do a little bit better because I don't have that insulin spike and then subsequent drop, and I don't feel like I'm getting as hungry throughout the day. So I'm able to eat a little bit less because I'm better managing the type of carb that I'm eating, if that makes sense, right? So some people, that's why watching carbs works for them, but it's not necessarily because we're now no longer eating carbs or eating fewer carbs, and carbs what was causing the weight gain. It's that we're better managing our hunger and glucose levels by being more mindful of the type of carbs that we eat and how we eat them, right? So I just wanted to explain that. I know it's a little, I don't want anyone to ever think like I'm suggesting one way or another. I'm just putting the information out there and hopefully helping things to make a little bit more sense. And I know this is something that I see come up quite a bit, and I get it, right? But this is why we do back to basics, because there are sometimes things that we hear and we just accept it as true without really doing a lot of investigating and things like that. And so I wanted to kind of bring some clarification to this. And also, it's just something that we probably know, but we just forget about, right? Because there's so much going on constantly. So hopefully that made sense. I don't want to like get too deep into it, but really it really is about the type of carb you're eating and how you're eating it, right? You're going to have a much greater glucose spike from just eating a sandwich with 2 slices of white bread and maybe like 1 slice of meat versus a sandwich with whole grain or multi-seed and then having an avocado in there, having some, maybe you make like an egg sandwich. Like that's significantly going to change how your body is able to use that glucose, which controls your energy levels. And when we have energy, we don't feel, well, not always, but when we're well fed, we're not going to be needing to replenish that energy. So we're not going to be eating as much. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a little kind of like, I don't know. Sometimes it makes sense to me, and then I say it out loud, and I'm like, yeah, I think that makes sense, but it doesn't always. So you guys gotta tell me if it makes sense. So really, it's about if you're like struggling, and the reason I kind of wanted to say this and talk about this is because I see people struggling with this, right? Like, do I count calories or do I count carbs? And if your goal is weight loss and just to be healthier in general, just start out by finding the right calorie deficit, because that can be hard enough, right? That can already be overwhelming. And we don't need to add more stress to it by finding the perfect carb intake, when in reality, if we just start focusing on eating more mindfully and creating that calorie deficit, we may not need to stress ourselves out even more worrying about our carb intake, because it'll be taken care of in the calorie deficit. So I hope that makes sense, you guys. Again, everyone is able and should approach their journey how is best for them, right? So I'm not saying one way or another. I'm just giving you guys that information, which hopefully kind of helps. Yeah, Heather, this is something that just happens, unfortunately. Heather was saying, I hate like how I have to like be so much more mindful of what I eat now versus when I was younger. And you know what? All of us, as we age, like our body just slows down, right? It can't be operating in that prime, whatever forever. It's going to slow down. And unfortunately, one of the things that does tend to happen is our metabolism slows down. And even though it's still functioning, our metabolism isn't going to be as good as it was when I was 19 or 20, right? It's just not going to be that way. So we do have to be a little bit more mindful of what we're eating, because we don't have that metabolism burning at that same rate that it was years ago. And it's frustrating, but it's normal. And one of the best things, I don't know if you guys are going to hear it, you can do to kind of hijack your metabolism is exercise. I know it's not always the most fun thing to do. Sometimes I'm like, I literally don't want to do this, but it really is one of the major aspects of our metabolism that we have control over. Can't control our age. We can't, control our gender or like our genetics, right? A lot of those things affect our metabolism, and we don't have control over that, but we can affect our exercise output. And that is one of the best ways to kind of hijack your metabolism, right? So let's move on to cravings. I've been seeing this come up a lot, and this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. Maybe I'm just a nerd, but I think it's super, super interesting how cravings work. Now I'm more conscious of the time to choose my food. Yeah. And just having that like conscious awareness, allows you to kind of be present in the moment and make decisions based on, like being like conscious and aware, right? Because it's easy to like mindlessly do things if we're not taking the time to be consciously aware of it. Because there's a lot of things we do that are just like habit, right? We just do it because it's what we do. We don't need to necessarily be aware of it. But bringing more awareness to our meal times and anytime we're having food and drinks and things like that can really, really help, especially if you're trying to create new habits and get rid of older ones, right? Because we got to be aware of it before we can do anything about it, right? So let's talk about cravings. Also, yes, let me start with this. Rachel, psycho cravings get me every month. Fritos and chocolate. Do you mean Fritos like and chocolate together? Because I can kind of see how that would work, just because it's like sweet and salty. But Fritos, man, that just reminds me of dog's paws because they always smell like Fritos. I don't know why. Anyway, I also want to start with that too. Let's revisit this idea of 80-20. Everybody knows 80-20, right? If you don't know, 80-20 is basically where you eat and do what you know to be good for you 80% of the time, and the other 20% of the time, you don't really focus on it that much. You have the cake, you have the whatever, you have the Fritos and chocolate because it's just 20%. It's not going to undo the 80% that you've done, right? Now, let's think of this in terms of a month too. If you're on your cycle and you have those days where you're just like craving things you wouldn't normally eat, what is 2, 3, 5 days out of a whole month, right? And I'm not saying like, oh, just don't care and like do whatever you want and just go for it, but give yourself that 80-20, right? It doesn't have to just be on a daily basis. If you have 3, 4, 5, whatever days out of the month, and you're like having more of those foods because you're craving it more often, let that be 80-20 too, right? Because some of those things, maybe we can do more things like eat fiber or exercise, but also apply the 80-20 to that, because what, again, 3, 4, 5 days out of a month is practically nothing, right? The next thing I wanted to say was cravings in general was beyond practice the 80-20, because cravings are normal. You're gonna have cravings. If you are like, man, I just wish I could get to a point where I didn't have cravings for anything anymore. Like, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but it ain't gonna happen, right? That's just not realistic. Anyone who's alive is gonna have cravings every now and then. It's normal, right? So having cravings isn't the problem. It becomes a problem when the cravings are consistent and constant and take up way more brain space than we need to be dedicating to thoughts about food, right? So, the number one reason in my experience this happens if we have constant, um, consistent cravings is not eating enough, period, right? Because if we are underfed, our body, we know this, we've talked about this, our body uses a massive amount of calories every day just to keep us alive. It's crazy. If you think about how much energy your heart needs to pump over and over and over and over, I mean, I don't know what your heart rate is a minute, but let's say it's 80. 80 beats a minute. That's a lot of energy. And your body needs calories for all of that. That's just one organ. Talk about our brain, right? We need so much energy all day long. So we get thoughts of food usually when we're hungry, right? Because our hunger is a cue to eat. Because if we were never hungry, we wouldn't think about food. If we weren't thinking about food, then we wouldn't eat. And that's not sustainable with life, right? So hunger is a cue that our body needs energy. So if we're having constant thoughts about food, and those thoughts are specifically kind of foods that are like cheap foods, or maybe like really high in sugar or really high in fat or whatever, and we're having those thoughts a lot, if we think about it, it makes sense that we're having that, because if we're being underfed, if we're underfeeding ourselves and we don't have enough energy, our brain is going to tell us, hey, we need energy, aka food, and we need a lot of it because we're behind. So it's going to create cravings for high sugar, high fat foods. Why? Because fats have more calories per gram. That means 1 gram of a fat and 1 gram of protein. The fat is always going to have more calories because it's a fat. It just contains more energy. So cravings for like high fat food, it's going to give you a lot of calories in a smaller size, which makes sense. And the high sugar, well, we know that our body really, really, really quickly uses sugar, especially when it is not accompanied by a fiber or a protein or a fat, right? So our body is going to crave these things because it's quick energy and it's a lot of energy. And we need it because we're behind. So if you feel like you are constantly, consistently craving things, just try eating a little bit more throughout your day, right? Throughout your day, add a little bit more to your first shake, add a little bit more to your second, have a bigger snack, have bigger snacks throughout the day, right? These are things that can be very, very simple fixes, but we got to actually do it, right? So I encourage you. I know it seems like if I'm trying to do weight loss and you're telling me to eat more, how is that helpful, right? But if you're having these constant cravings, that's absolutely going to not only probably keep you from reaching your goal, but it's going to like mentally and emotionally take a toll on you, right? And we could fix this by eating more. I know it's scary, but it really, really, really can help. And again, cravings every now and then are normal, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about, and if you can relate to this, it's probably because this is happening to you, right? Too much of our time is spent thinking about foods that I shouldn't eat or foods that I can't eat or whatever. We're constantly thinking about that because we're low on energy and our body needs more energy. And until it gets that energy, it's going to tell us to eat high fat, high sugar foods because it's a lot of energy very quickly, right? So hopefully that helps. Also, this is very fascinating to me. I don't know if you guys are going to be like as geeked out by it as I am, but our brain and our gut share like a direct connection, right? And we talk about our gut biome. We know that our gut biome just consists of a bunch of bacteria that are amazing and they're super awesome and they're helpful and they help us break down food so we can use it for energy. But those bacteria need to eat, right? So they become accustomed to eating the foods that we eat. So if we're used to eating a certain way, even if we're eating, like great, but we start eating a different way, we have to feed our microbiome, the bacteria in our microbiome, right? And if it's used to eating other foods that we're no longer eating, it's going to send some signals up to the brain and be like, hey, where's this food? She hasn't eaten it. That's what we need to survive. So you got to get her to eat it. And it's going to create those cravings, right? So taking a probiotic, especially if you've like made major changes to the way that you eat, can be super helpful because you can kind of replenish that gut microbiome with new bacteria that is going to now feed off of the new foods you're eating. So you're going to cut down on your cravings that way too. So I don't know. That's super cool to me. I don't know if you guys think it's that cool, but I think it's awesome. So keep that in mind too. A probiotic can be very, very helpful. And I wanted to go back to something that I saw, and I don't remember who it was. Maybe Maria. Sorry if I'm wrong. But I see this come up too, cravings at night, right? Or having like doing super, super well. Yes, Carolyn, my cravings always happen late at night. And like, please listen, just listen. It's gonna make so much more sense when I'm done, okay? Because I want everyone to be able to be successful and not have to like worry about this all the time, right? Because again, it can be a super easy fix, but applying it is what becomes difficult, right? But if you're finding that most of the time you do great during the day, you eat everything you're supposed to eat, you're making great choices, you're just going strong. And then by the evening, you notice like, holy crap, I want to eat anything and everything. Maybe those cravings are for food, or maybe it's for something like high sugar, high fat, right? That is, again, most likely, most of the time, a result of not eating enough during the day. Sure, maybe you're making great choices. You're eating protein and fats and complex carbs and fibers and all these things, but you're not eating enough. So what happens is our brain sends signals that we're hungry, and we eat a little bit, but not quite enough. So we still have some of that hunger hormone hanging out, like we didn't really get satisfied. So then that hunger hormone stays there, and then we get hungry again, and now you have more hunger hormones, right? And then you eat a little bit, and a little bit goes away, but it's growing because we're eating, but not quite enough to be satisfying our body's energy needs. So at the end of the day, we have this big like ghrelin, aka your hunger hormone, ghrelin cloud that's just floating around, right? And now it's this big cloud of ghrelin sending your brain like, hey, hello, feed us, eat. And your brain is going to send off those signals for cravings, right? High fat, high sugar, a lot of energy really quick, right? So if you find that more often than not during the evenings, you kind of feel like I'm just like losing it here and I've done super well all day. I don't know what it is about the evenings. Try eating a little bit more throughout the day. It doesn't have to be major, right? It can be, if you're having a shake for your first meal, adding maybe one more ingredient, having a little bit larger snack than your next meal or whatever. Add to it a little bit at a time. So that way, by the end of the day, you have done a far better job of satisfying that ghrelin. So at the end of the day, there isn't this huge ghrelin cloud floating around that you have to now address, right? Because we've been responsibly managing our hunger throughout the day by giving our body more of what it needs, which is energy, right? Because again, think about it. It's insane what our body does for us every day just to keep us alive. It's so cool. But it's very energy demanding, right? It needs energy. So we got to give it the energy it needs in order to, well, function, obviously, but then even to be where we want to be with weight loss, because it often isn't, I don't know what I'm doing, or, I don't know how to eat, or it's not necessarily always about what we're not doing or we're doing. It's about what's holding us back, right? And sometimes that is that cycle of like deprivation and then binging and then deprivation and binging, right? We've talked about that binge restrict cycle, how if we restrict to extreme, we can only do it for so long, and then we binge, and then we feel bad about it. So then we want to start over again on Monday or whatever, and we're like, I'm going to do it this time. We have all this motivation, and then we deprive, and restrict again, even with good intentions, right? But then we get to this point where it's like, oh my gosh, I just can't do this anymore, and then we binge, and then we feel bad about it, and then we think, all right, this next time I'm going to do it, and it's a cycle, right? And we're going to keep staying in that cycle until we learn how to kind of be more responsible with our restrictions, right? Because yeah, we need to restrict a little bit, but I think the issue is restricting a little bit too much at times, which finding that like that balance can be difficult. And that's why it takes practice. And that's why we talk about things like this, right? Because it is hard. And sometimes we need help to do it. And I want to help get you guys there because I know you can be there. So these are just things that I think we know already, but we kind of just either forget or we tend to like overcomplicate things because we want to do really, really well. Because I don't really think anyone just is like, yeah, I'll just do like subpar, you know, like we want to do well. But in our quest to do well, we tend to overcomplicate things a little bit too much, right? Preaching to the choir. I do it all the time, but we're not doing that anymore, right? That's why we do these. So that's what I wanted to tell you guys about the cravings. Again, cravings, normal. Thinking about food all the time, taking up way too much brain space, not normal, right? And there are things that you can do, the probiotic, and or just making sure you're responsibly feeding yourself throughout the day, because any alive person that is healthy and well is going to crave things when you're low on energy. You know, it just happens. Probiotics can help. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily help trick them. I guess it kind of does. It tricks your brain a little bit, but it replenishes like your gut biome. So you're kind of putting in, introducing new bacteria, and because they're new, they're going to be feeding off the food that you're eating. So they're not going to have these pre-existing like, cravings to eat whatever you were eating before because they're new, right? And then eventually, the bacteria that was like feeding off of the other stuff is either going to have to adapt or it's going to die and go away, right? And it's just going to be replaced by this new bacteria. So kind of tricks it, but it really just helps to introduce like a new gut biome. And again, your gut and your brain have like a direct connection. They can communicate. So taking care of both, you kind of help to strengthen that connection that they have. That's so funny that you say that, Carolyn. Chew gum. So I get hungrier when I chew gum. I don't know. I've talked to like a few people that say the same. I think it's just different for everyone. But yeah, if I'm chewing gum, like it took me a while to realize this, but without a doubt, like every time within 30 minutes of like the flavor going away, I'm gonna be hungry. Like I'm gonna have now the desire to eat something. I don't know. I think maybe it's just like having something in my mouth and chewing, but never actually like eating or like some like nutrients going to my body. I don't know. But for me, gum is like it's just gonna make me more hungry. But maybe sugar free. Maybe that's like what the issue is. I don't know. It's either the mechanical process of chewing and nothing happening, or maybe it's like the sugars in it. I don't know. I've actually never like paid attention to my gum. I don't really chew it a lot more. I don't really chew it now as much, but now I'm gonna have to look because I don't even know if I get sugar free. Hello, Dolores. Thank you for joining. So I know we kind of went through a lot today, but I really wanted to cover what we were supposed to cover last week, but then Facebook was being weird. And I also wanted to cover the cravings because I think these are things that we can always revisit because it's helpful, right? So I hope it was educational. If didn't teach you something new, then hopefully it has kind of helped to refresh your brain a little bit. And again, approach your journey however is best for you. That may look a little different, and that's okay, right? But also, I don't know if I was able to get to all the questions today, so I'm sorry about that. I tried to get them, but sometimes I'm like just on a roll and I have to keep going, otherwise I'll forget something. So, ooh, Crystal, how do you find what an appropriate calorie deficit is for you? Patience, practice, persistence. Don't forget the 3 Ps: patience, practice, persistence. But also start with an app. I don't care which one you use, honestly. We have a calculator in the community. You can use like MyFitnessPal or Lose It, whatever you want, and enter your information as it requests it, right? It's going to ask your age or height, your weight, your activity level, all these things. It's going to spit out a number for you. That number is a starting point. It is more than likely not going to be an appropriate starting point for you, but it's where you start to figure out what adjustments need to be made. So if it spits out 1500, probably going to be too low. However, let's try at 1500 and see how we feel. Do I feel like I'm thinking about food a lot more? Do I feel like I don't have energy? Am I like being cranky all the time? These are signs that we're hungry, right? So then we'll up it. by 150 to 200 calories at a time. So we don't need to go from like 1500 to 2500. We need to go from 15 to 1650 or 1700 and see how we feel there. And then repeat the process, right? Until we find something that is a little bit more appropriate. And the only way you're going to know it's appropriate is based on how you feel. So you really have to pay attention to, do I feel like I'm satisfying my energy needs? Do I feel like my cravings are normal, but they're not excessive? I'm able to sleep well. I'm like being, my normal happy-go-lucky self, whatever. These are signs that your energy level is okay. And if you start to lose weight and or inches at that, then that is the point where you can kind of determine like, okay, this is where I need to be for now, right? And again, you're going to have to keep adjusting it, because especially if you're going through major weight loss, if you're, 300 pounds and then you go suddenly to 200 pounds, well, I was going to say suddenly, but that's a major difference, right? We've now changed a lot of weight. So now there's less body that needs to be fueled. So now we're going to have to readjust that calorie intake again, right? So, it would be super nice if I could sit here and just say like, oh, I'll put, all this information in and I'll have the exact calorie intake for you. Fortunately, it doesn't work that way. But those apps can be a good place to start. And then you can kind of go from there. That's why you have to practice patience, persistence. What was it? Patience, persistence, and practice? I don't know. I try my best to watch carbs and have a mindset. Yes, there you go. And a lot of it is mindset too, right? We kind of have to catch ourselves when we're in these old patterns of thinking, and we have to be mindful of it and think, wait, this type of thinking, this mindset isn't serving me. It's not doing anything for me. It's not propelling me forward. So instead of doing this, I'm now going to consciously make a decision in an effort to go this way, right? And building those new pathways in your brain is possible, but it takes time, right? Like it's like going down a forest. We've kind of talked about this before, and there's a lane, there's a path this way that's really well paved or trotted or whatever, and then down the right you have a path that's like barely there, like is that really even a path? And of course we're going to want to take this one because it's easier, right? Because we know to take this one, but it doesn't mean that's the only path we can take. We just have to work on going down this right path, and path to the right, not the right path, but the path to the right. And now, trotting down everything. And eventually, after doing that for so long, this is going to be just as easy to take. And then that one we're going to be forgetting about because it's neglected, because now it's overgrown because we haven't been, wearing the path down. So building those new neural connections in your brain is possible. It absolutely is. But we have to use like conscious awareness, right? We have to take the time to really become more tuned in to our mindset and how we're thinking and acting. And then when we catch ourselves doing it, doing something else instead, right? Because it's not like, oh, I want to change my mindset and I'm just going to do it. It takes time. Having an issue with stubborn fat, what to do? I'm doing everything right. So this is a good question, Dolores. I'd really have to just have more like information. There's so many different things that can affect fat loss. Which I love that you said fat loss and not weight, because they're not always synonymous, right? I know that. But I'd have to just talk to you like more, like to get more information from you. So if you want to send me an email, please do that. And then we can just link up and I can give you better feedback, because right now it's like, I don't really know enough to kind of give you feedback that's helpful to you. So if you send me an email, and I'll get back to you and we can kind of talk more about that. It's a matter of doing away with old habits and learning new and healthy ones. Absolutely. Absolutely. And don't get mad at yourself if you're like, hey, I'm going to try to stop being, so negative when I talk to myself. And then 5 minutes later, you're having negative thoughts. Don't get mad. Don't get upset. Think, oh, this is what we're changing and I'm not going to do this anymore. And now I'm going to do this way. Even if you're working towards developing new habits and skills, and you find yourself doing the old habits and skills that you didn't want, you no longer want, it's okay, because your brain is automatically going to go there because that's what's easy. That's what's normal, right? It's going to take some time to find a new path, but we can do it. And there's no point getting mad at ourselves for going back to the old pattern. It's just what we know. Thank you. I've never had to watch what I ate until I turned 40 and quit smoking. Oh yeah. Well, amazing job on quitting smoking. That's awesome. Also, that can really already kind of, I don't want to say produce, but like cause an increase in hunger, because smoking can decrease hunger because it kind of is like a stimulant in a way, the nicotine. So it can really, decrease that hunger. And so now that you're not smoking, you don't have that nicotine kind of suppressing your appetite. And so you may feel a little bit hungrier, which you may eat a little bit more. Um, but it also could be that you needed these nutrients, right? Because you weren't getting them because you were, that nicotine was kind of um, keeping your appetite suppressed, I guess. Yep, things definitely do slow down. I don't even want to say it's an unfortunate part of life. It's just part of life. It's amazing what our body does for us, you guys. It allows us to wake up every day, to have meaningful conversations, to, carry us to just walk, right? To be able to walk wherever we want, like connect with people. And it takes a lot to keep a body moving and doing that, right? And it makes sense that it's going to slow down. Like, shoot, it deserves a break, right? Like our bodies deserve a break. They do so much for us day in and day out until we die. So yeah, it does slow down. The metabolism does slow down, Gia, as we age. And it is normal, but kind of like deserves it, right? Because like it's working hard to keep us alive. So I feel like it kind of deserves a break, right? Doesn't always play out for us the way we want, but hey, we need a break. Because if our metabolism's never slowed down, we operated at like that like degree of or energy forever, like we would have drastically shorter lifespans because we just can't maintain that for that long. It's just impossible. So that is all I had for today, you guys. So hopefully this, if it didn't bring new information to you, hopefully it refreshed you. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.